justify the purpose. We are going through a very crucial period designed by the pandemic COVID-19. We all know that earlier recessions were followed by spikes, mainly supported by automation. Looking at the trend now, how things are shaping up, the current recession will be followed by a spike, most, mostly supported by artificial intelligence. That's what I infer and I have been reading. While the previous spikes were accelerated by adoption of technology, this time it's going to be a transformation by application of new technology and repurposing of existing technology. This is going to be a very important, crucial thing. We have already started witnessing that COVID-19 has exponentially accelerated technology adoption. I'm not going deep into various segments, industry analysis, or success stories. This has overall, in general, given a clear edge for the technology startups than ever before. Though there was a decline prominently in seed and early stage investments, year decline in funding and decline in the number of deals, the industry has already started showing gradual recovery from the month of September, and most segments appear to be on the recovery path to pre-COVID levels. The shift to digital consumption has provided the necessary push to various sectors such as education, healthcare, and commerce. As per reports, 75% of startups are gradually recovering post-lockdown. Nearly 30% of startups have already pivoted to newer markets for alternative revenue streams, while over 55% of startups are focusing on profitability and reducing the cash burn. This is a very important scenario now. It is very important now that the startups should begin implementing optimization strategies and use proper methods for tax planning. Proper tax planning is essential to maintain positive cash flows, the most critical aspect for every startup the, now. Through the webinar today, we aim to give to the startup an overall perspective about the taxation ecosystem, clear understanding of various tax and GST guidelines, the statutory compliances, which often can become a roadblock later, the process, its impact and benefit to startups, and various issues faced by the startup. We have with us today three experienced experts from this field who are also working as advisors, consultants to various startups. That gives strength. Mr. Fazil has already given you a brief about the speakers. We have Mr. C.A. Vivek, Chartered Accountant Vivek Krishna Govind, Senior Partner of the leading Chartered Accountancy firm, Mrs. Verma and Verma. Always a pleasant person, accessible, always smiling, bright young man who can speak with clarity on the subject with in lucid words and authority on the topic. I'm really happy that Mr. Chartered Accountant Vivek accepted this and is with us today. Mr. Sudhakar Girdhar Partner, CFO Bridge India, which is India's largest CFO service provider with world-class finance talent, and it's a virtual team, which that's a very new concept that has come. Virtual team of CFOs, of highly experienced CFOs from different sectors, all coming together and qualified which are they have qualified financial professionals and they have focused on startups and MSMEs. C.A. Ramakrishnan V is a partner of SBRV, as we know. He is based out of Calicut, having rich experience in IT and GST and closely working with MSMEs. Welcome you all. I'm really happy that I could moderate a session with such persons of such experience who can give real takeaways for the startups here. Looking forward to a very powerful deliberation and interaction. To start with, Mr. Govind, can you please give us an overview of the taxation ecosystem now, the importance of it now, the importance issues, the guidelines the startups must know, and the areas that they should meticulously follow. We have already shared some of the questions the startups have asked before getting the various issues that, so let us know all these aspects in general that can give a very good understanding to the startups who have joined us today. And let me also thank all the startups who joined today. Hello.
Yes,
Can you
you're
hear
audible,
me?
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So I'm really happy that all we have a good panel of speakers and a very good number of participants joining today, and I'm looking for lots of deliberations and discussions today. Over to you, Govin.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. At the outset, let me thank all of you who are here on a working day afternoon. Gives me immense pleasure and pride to be a part of this session. Kerala Startup Mission has always been very close to my heart, having worked on so many things from early stage when it was initially incorporated as the startup village, and from that point over the last 8-10 years, and particularly in the last 3 years when we've had Saji heading Startup Mission very closely. Even in fact, yesterday we were together in another Zoom call where we are now trying to work with him in the new digital university where he's currently the vice chancellor. Phenomenal amount of work has been done by KSUM over the past few years with great leadership by the whole team, Riaz and all of you at Startup Mission. So Fasil, let me thank you for taking this opportunity and for organizing an event of this scale. And of course, our very inspirational past president of Calicut Management Association and my good friend Ajayan. We worked together very closely when I was heading Kerala Management Association, and we've traveled together and attended many events together, organized so many events together, and it was wonderful to see how the Calicut Management Association took off under his leadership to another level, and continuing to do great work. We have I'm seeing the presence of the current CMA president, Captain Haridas, also in the room, and lot of good work being done by all of you, and we're all very happy and proud of the good work being done, and it continues. The best part is that all of you are continuing in that whole you did not stop after your term was over. You're continuing to support the ecosystem and taking the lead to organize events of this nature. Now, this is, what I must say, very challenging job for three of us here. I'm sure my co-speakers would also agree with me that this is not going to be easy, because every aspect that we talk about are topics in itself which will need 3-4 hours of deliberation. If we have to start talking on any of these topics, be it angel tax or be it tax slabs or be it the GST or any of these things, and the kind of wide ranging queries that we have seen from over 100 participants here, it just goes to show that I think we are going to need a series of such events. And I'm sure that this is only the first step. Today what we will try and do is throw some light, give a whole the broad framework of what the tax regime is on the income tax and the GST side, because practically it will be very difficult to actually do a one-on-one analysis and discussion on many of the queries which have been raised from your side. Some of the queries are very interesting also. I'm sure the speakers to follow will speak on specific aspects also as we go forward. My job as the moderator has already informed is to give an overall outline, and that is what I will try and do over the next 10-15 minutes or so. Now, when you come to the tax regime in India, basically we look at it from two perspectives. One is the direct tax, and second is the indirect tax. Now, direct tax is basically income tax, right? So first, let me just talk about income tax, because again, looking at the queries and the nature of it, my feeling is that many of the participants are a little confused on the kind of taxes. I saw some questions wherein people were even having a little bit of there is an issue on whether on what is the tax being paid, on what value is it being paid. There is also some confusion on what is income tax, what is GST, etc. So I understand that we have a group of entrepreneurs here, a group of startups here, some of whom may be having more advanced level of queries, but some of you may be basic. So we just thought that during the course of this, since this is a session for us to just throw some light on the whole regime, just try and touch upon some of the basics also, because I'm sure that at least many of you in this room may not really know about the fundamentals of the tax regime in our country. So just over the next few minutes, throw some light on what is the whole background of the income tax in India. Now, basically, if you look at the income tax, there are 5 heads of income, which is which has been highlighted under Section 14 of the Tax Act. Try my best not to talk about sections, etc. But since we are practicing professionals, once in a while, pardon me if some sections pop up. So now, income from salary, as the heading goes, it's very obvious. what is under income from salary, salary income. Most of you here who are attending today would be entrepreneurs, etc. So your income may not typically be income from salary. It could be income from profits and gains of business. But people who are working in organizations, entities, banks, and all other corporates, their income is income from salary. Next, second head of income is the income from house property. You may have a home, and there is a rental. Rental is taxable. It needs to be disclosed. But there are lot of exemptions, etc., deductions which are available from house property. Why I'm saying this is that I know that many of you here probably would not even know that there are deductions available. It is not possible for us in a short span of time to talk about these deductions, but we'll just try and make you understand that there are deductions available. Talk to somebody who knows, so that if you're not claiming your deductions to the maximum extent possible, you may all actually be paying more taxes than you're required to. Under no circumstances will any of us, none of us, the three speakers here, would not talk about any form of tax evasion here. I can assure you that. But there is something called tax planning, where there are rules, there are interpretations, there are positions taken by law, either through case laws or through tribunals or through high courts, etc., where a view is possible. And where two views are possible, you take a beneficial view as a matter of interpreting the law, and you plan your tax legally. I think that is a wise way to go about it. So understand that for all of these, in each of these avenues in taxation, it is not really black or white. There is a lot of gray in between. So to understand and to interpret the gray makes all the difference when it comes to planning the amount of taxes that you pay. So the second, as I said, one is salary, second house property, third is income from profits and gains of business, which is basically the profits earned by what is called an SSC. When you pay at any taxpayer, is called an SSC. So the profits which you make from the entity that you own or run, or there are certain other types also. Different types. You have a certain license that you have. You sell the license that you get. A property or a land or anything tangible, intangible too. There is a capital gain element that comes. Again, the computation is not as straightforward as it may seem. It's not that the price at which you sell minus the price at which you bought. A lot of people think so. I'm telling you from practical experience. People just come to us sometimes, say, ഞാൻ വിറ്റത് 100 രൂപയ്ക്കാണ്, മേടിച്ചത് 40 രൂപയ്ക്കാണ്, അപ്പൊ 60 രൂപയ്ക്ക് ഞാൻ ടാക്സ് കൊടുത്തു എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ് വരുന്ന ആൾക്കാരുണ്ട്. But you don't have to pay on the entire 60. There is a way in which you need to compute. You have to look at it. There is an indexation benefit. Then there are several other benefits which you can take, which are allowed under the law. So you need to understand what are the deductions which you can claim under capital gains. And finally, income from other sources. Basically, don't fall under any of these four heads. Many items are there. All of that will come under income from other sources. That's just broadly. Now, moving on, next, the topic I'll talk about is tax slabs. You need to understand under what slab you're in. Again, I'm not going to get into the what are the slabs, 2,50,000, 5 lakh, 10 lakh, and I'm not going to talk numbers here, but you need to correctly understand, and these tax slabs are getting revised every year. Just because you paid in some slab last year doesn't mean that you're on the same slab this year. Budget to remember every year, so that is something that everybody follows closely to see under what slab you're in. Adil Tanna, what you need to understand, particularly because I'm startup, so you need to know that there is a concept of, when you're an individual, there is a resident, then there is a non-resident, and a resident but not ordinarily resident. 3 category ഉണ്ട്. You need to know ഇതിലെ നമ്മൾ ഏത് കാറ്റഗറിയിലാണ് പെടുന്നത് എന്നുള്ളത്. Again, our definition of what these are, I'm not here to take a class on income tax or a lecture on that. Just throwing some light on some concepts in case you are not aware of it. You need to know that such things exist. So for how many days are you in the country? For how many days? A lot of people are taken by surprise when a huge tax demand comes for their overseas income. അറിയുന്നില്ല. They have been outside and all that, all the records show പുറമേ നിന്ന് വന്ന ഇൻകം ഒന്നും ടാക്സബിൾ അല്ല, അതൊക്കെ ഞങ്ങൾ അവിടെ ഏൺ ചെയ്തതല്ലേ എന്നുള്ള ഒരു സ്റ്റാൻഡ് എടുക്കുന്ന ഒരുപാട് പേര്. They are seeing that, suddenly when the tax demand comes, they come rushing to us with a notice, and we tell them, you are liable. Because according to the law, you may be saying that you are an NRI or you have a, whatever OCI card or you travel and all. But point remains that adil parnittulla chela conditions satisfy that. So you are, resident but not ordinarily resident, and you may have to pay taxes here. Could be. I'm just saying. I'm not saying that every case and all that, but you need to. Some of you here may be traveling a lot, and you need to plan their travel such that they are in India for the minimum number of days, etc. On a regular basis, they have to ensure them when they're outside India. So they ensure that their foreign income is not taxed here and all that. Those are all ways in which you're planning your taxes. Now moving on, next point is that this is from an individual angle. Now you look at it from a company angle. Are you paying tax at the rate at which you are intended to pay? Are you aware of the new tax slabs? Generally, ആരോട് ചോദിച്ചാൽ ഇന്ത്യയിലെ കമ്പനിക്ക് എത്ര ടാക്സ് റേറ്റ് people will say 30%. You will just assume that 30% is the tax rate in India. Right? 30% is the tax rate. What's the tax rate has been for some time, plus whatever, surcharge and all of that. But you must know that of late, over the last few years, conscious effort has been taken in various budgets. Different categories of companies and tax rates have been tweaked. So today, where do you stand in the Ladan? Most of the companies today have to pay only 25% tax. Very few companies are above the 25%. I think I'm pretty sure all of us in this room who are attending this session today will be in the 25% slab if you are opting for deductions. If you're not opting for deductions, you can go down to the 22% slab. Now, for new companies which are opting for what is called, there is a section 115 BAB. If you're going further, the tax rate is only 15%. So if you are already having a company and you're starting some new operation, you must think about it. Does it make sense to continue it in the same company, or should you form another company for it? Similarly, if you're a partnership firm, does it make sense to continue as a partnership firm now because you're paying tax at a much higher rate? It is time. If you ask any of us here, we would say that, of course, company, if it's a company, the compliance hassles are a lot more. You have to do a lot more of filings and all of that. But point remains that if you are a proper compliant company, it's about time that you converted your, any operation, not just your main company, but even if you have other smaller partnerships in which you are paying, substantial amounts of tax, this is a good time for you to reassess it and convert those into companies, because tax rate for a company is much lower. Now, another point we see is that people are not aware that there is something called a minimum alternate tax. So for a company, it is not just that, as per the computation of income tax, if you're taxable or not, there is also another concept called minimum alternate tax, wherein you have to look at the P&L account, which there is a way in which it is to be worked, how book profit should be worked, etc. So what is minimum alternate tax? You must know that something like that exists, right? Am I all right so far? Somebody wants to intervene or put a comment or raise a hand, you can let me know so that I can pace it out. Otherwise, next 5-7 minutes, I'll just quickly run through some of the other basic concepts and wind up on that. Now, moving on, tax deducted at source, an area where a lot of entrepreneurs, startups are getting into trouble. Maximum number of tax demands are coming because proper tax deduction ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല. TDS rules മര്യാദയ്ക്ക് നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലായിട്ടില്ല. There are a lot of sections in that. There are a lot of sections under TDS 194J, 194. Section മാറിപ്പോകുന്നു, section തെറ്റിപ്പോകുന്നു, lower percentage ചെയ്യുന്നു, higher percentage ചെയ്യുന്നു. You put it under the wrong section, pay higher, and then you realize it and you try to make it lower. It's not easy to get a refund from the department. Once you pay it to the department, പിന്നെ അത് പോയി correct ചെയ്ത് refund മേടിക്കലൊന്നും എളുപ്പമല്ല. So understand correctly what your transaction is, and our transaction appropriate ആയിട്ടുള്ള TDS ആണോ ആ rate ആണോ വരുന്നത്, correct ആയിട്ട് do all your filings on time. Department has become very, very, very strict now. They have a lot of counter mechanisms because there is an annual information report in which നമ്മൾ എന്തെങ്കിലുമൊക്കെ സാധനങ്ങൾ, large value purchases, large value transactions, everything is getting mapped. They know. You buy an Audi car and you quietly think you paid, and you're sitting without declaring it, you will get a notice from somewhere because it is all going. The Audi dealer will be sending a report to the tax department. You will get a notice asking, where is your source? You have paid, you've shown a source of only 10 lakhs and paid only 1 lakh of tax, and here it is, you're buying a car which is worth 1 crore. Where did you get the money from? So ensure that whenever you go for large value purchases and all that, your source documentation എല്ലാം correct ആയിട്ട് ബിൽഡ് ചെയ്യണം. Don't assume that the department ഇതൊക്കെ ആരറിയാനാ എന്നുള്ളൊരു കാലം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. It's no longer like that. Be very careful. Moving on, slightly more advanced concepts. These are all a little basic, but very, very important. Every entrepreneur, very important domestic business ചെയ്യുന്നു അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇന്റർനാഷണൽ ബിസിനസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന എല്ലാവരും കംപ്ലൈ ചെയ്യേണ്ട മിനിമം കാര്യങ്ങളാണ്. ബിക്കോസ് അത് ചെയ്തില്ല എന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ യുവർ ട്രാൻസാക്ഷൻ ഇസ് ഓവർ. Much later, you would be slapped with a big tax demand. We have seen it happen, wherein just because of tax demands, we've seen businesses which have had to shut down simply because they were not aware of the law or they have not complied with it. And പിന്നീട് വലിയൊരു ഡിമാൻഡ് വരുമ്പോൾ അത് അടയ്ക്കാൻ പൈസ ഇല്ല. Then you go declare yourself as bankrupt and take it up with whatever other mechanisms to wind up your business. എത്രയോ കേസുകൾ കാണും. Moving on, let me talk about another concept again, which a lot of people are not aware of. This is called transfer pricing. ഇൻകം ടാക്സ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും നമ്മുടെ ഇൻകത്തിന്റെ മുകളിലുള്ള ഒരു പെർസെൻറ്റേജ് അടച്ചാൽ ഇൻകം ടാക്സ് ആയി എന്നുള്ള ഒരു ധാരണയിലാണ് ഒരുപാട് പേര് പോകുന്നത്. But this is an extremely important concept. Transfer pricing basically means an international or specified domestic transaction between two associated enterprises. അതൊക്കെ ഡിഫൈൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട് എന്താണെന്നുള്ളത്. നമ്മുടെ for simple layman's terms, you can just think about it as any related entity, which is basically, especially for international transactions, you need to be very, very, very careful about the price at which the contract is entered into, what is called arm's length price. A transaction with an associate enterprise should be comparable to what it is with another entity. If it is not comparable with what it is with an entity, that difference is being assessed as tax. And again, we are seeing that one particular case where I've been appearing in the dispute resolution panel, DRP. Multiple hearings are going on. It's a very small company, a company with a turnover of just about 4 or 5 crores, has been slapped with a tax demand of almost 3 crores. Almost 75% of the turnover is the tax demand, because they have said that this particular item you have sold it to your associated enterprise at a margin of only 2%, whereas a similar product other companies are getting 20%. 18% you have ensure you have not declared it correctly and undervalued, etc. And that 18%, the method in which it has been calculated itself is a large chunk of it will have to get deleted because there are errors in it. But nevertheless, the kind of demands which are coming in transfer pricing is huge. 300 crore, 500 crores, 5,000 crores in large companies and banks and all that. Many a time we are seeing huge additions which are being made by officers here. So understand that there is something called transfer pricing. For transfer pricing, that is how you must maintain your records. You need documentation when you get into transactions with associate enterprises. Documentation should be proper. You need an audit for it also. It's not enough that you document and keep it. You need there is an audit, mandatory audit. If you're above the threshold, you need to do an audit. There are certain methods which are specified: comparable uncontrolled method, resale price method, cost plus method, profit split method, TNMM, transaction net margin, etc. Other methods. So 5-6 methods are spelled out in transfer pricing. You must understand under what you must put it, etc. So please take it up with your consultant or whoever is advising you if you have such transactions. Otherwise, much later you will be slapped with a big demand. And for still larger contracts, it is always advisable to get into what is called an advanced pricing agreement, APAs. Again, I'm not getting into that. And specifically for startups, you must know that there are a few exemptions which are available. I'm just giving an overview simply because I know that there are 2 learned speakers to follow. One who will be specifically talking about the direct taxes, and one who will specifically be talking about indirect taxes. And I'm particularly happy the speaker on GST, Ramakrishnan, is my student and was our audit manager at our Verma in Calicut. I'm so happy. I was telling Ajay, I was so happy when I realized that he's also a speaker at this session. And I'm sure that during the course of discussion, they will be taking up specifics, but let me again just broadly throw some light on that for the next couple of minutes and then wind up. So under the Startup India scheme, you must understand whether first and foremost, you must register yourself and ensure that you are recognized as a startup as per the definition. It's very clear what it is, and you have to follow that below 100 crore, all those thresholds. I'm not getting into it. And once you are eligible for that, then there is a section called Section 80 IAC, wherein your profits are tax free. So understand that there is such a section. Again, the modalities of the section I'm not getting into. Similarly, another very complex and draconian rule which had come was the whole angel tax. thankfully that has been diluted substantially now for all the startups which are again which are registered and recognized as a startup, and where the entities already with pre-registered with the DPIIT etc., and where the threshold levels now 25 crore, so large number of small value transactions have gone out of the angel tax network. Again, I'm not touching that specifically. I did see that there are some queries, and I must leave it to the learned speaker to talk about it. I'm sure that he will be talking about angel tax. If not, towards the close, we can always have another round of discussion on that. And GST, again, very, very beneficial for startups. But GST itself is a startup. You must only see it that way. Like any startup, GST is also going through a lot of initial stage difficulties. Couple of years, it has been going through all the gestation periods of setting up, etc. But now it is more or less stabilized. And, compared to the VAT regime, much simpler. The threshold is much higher. Input tax credit is something that will really ensure that the bottom lines of all our companies go up, and overall procedurally, once it all settles down, GST will be very, very good for our nation. And already we are beginning to see all the good sides of GST unfold, and hopefully the assessment will also be far less stringent compared to the earlier regime, and far less corrupt than the earlier regime. So let's hope that the assessment is also going to be clean. And overall, I'm sure that in the years ahead, we will all enjoy the fruits of a full-fledged GST. So I think this is it. I've lot many more to talk about, on other compliances also if I start talking, because when you talk to startups, also must understand there's company law and many other things where in compliance you have to ensure is done properly. So my last word of advice before I hand it back to our moderator is that please take compliance very, very seriously. It is just not worthwhile to not comply with the law. You may end up, there will be difficulties, there will be difficulty in understanding, there will also be some amount of tax payout, some amount of money which you may have to pay to your consultant or auditor and all that, but please treat these as an investment. Ensure that your books are clean, because you're all people looking for investment. You're all people who are subjected to due diligence. I do due diligence assignments on a regular basis, and most of the time the due diligence is failing because of compliance issues. If there is a compliance issue, as a due diligence consultant, we will come down very heavily in our report, saying that this is an entity where they don't take compliance seriously. And the moment you write that, a solid investor will immediately drop you like a hot potato. So understand that compliance is very, very critical. Invest your time, money, people in compliance. Once again, thank you very much, and I'll hand it back. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Vivek. Just a very nice introduction. You have very, very, very clearly given an outline of these various aspects and the focus they should look into. And we are not going to discuss into individual tax slabs, tax rates. I have seen some queries which can be addressed later. At least you let us have an understanding of all these important aspects as compliance itself, which you have mentioned. So this is an area which the startup should start looking at seriously, or somebody should start looking at seriously for them. Thank you, Mr. Vivek, for being with us on this. Maybe after the discussion, we can come on to some queries also, maybe or from the participants. Thank you very much. Mr. Sudhagar, can you take on some inputs on various tax guidelines and with the compliance, what they should do, and what all things, what are the benefits the startups have, and what all things they should look into to get those benefits, and especially on this angel tax and investment tax. These are very critical areas, which especially many investments are coming both from abroad and from the international level also. And there are some queries on what is the tax by the SARS to foreign export foreign companies. So what's the tax impact on that? So these are some of the specific questions we have got from the participants. So request Mr. Sudhagar to address and deliberate on this point.
Sure. Thank you, Vivek, for such a vast, detailed introduction. You have really laid the ground for us to speak. So you made actually you've clearly laid out the framework for us to take over from where you have concluded. I've actually put out a few thoughts on slides. Ajay sir, do you think I can share those slides?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Fasil, he can share, no?
Yes, we have enabled the permission.
Yeah.
Is this visible to everyone?
Yeah, right. Visible.
So, I won't get into too much detail. I just want to emphasize on few aspects, which, is used commonly, but we don't know what it actually means. First point, which first point, which will have to be very clear is when you call startup, the definition used under the tax laws for startup is rather different. Not every company that is incorporated, with certain objectives and technology are not startups, but companies which actually register with Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade as a startup. So only when you register yourself as a startup, you're called as a startup. The procedure for registration is rather simple. It's an online application, but you'll have to be unique in terms of what is the technology that you're trying to bring in. And of course, the turnover should be less than 100 crores. So only when you get yourself registered from DPIIT as a startup, the whole lot of incentives that we are going to talk about and benefits that we are going to talk about under the tax regime will actually flow on to you. So essential first point that we'll have to keep in mind is that you'll have to first register yourself as a startup. You can be either a company, partnership, or an LLP, but unless you register as a startup under the Government of India scheme, you're not a startup, and all those incentives and benefits that we talk of will not literally apply. So this is, I think, the first point that we'll have to literally drive into our minds. More often than not, I have many clients, many investors and entrepreneurs coming and telling, I'm a startup, can I take benefit of this? So but then you'll have to get to a understanding that you are a startup only when you get yourself recognized by the government. And one of the key points in the startup, while the process is rather very simple, you can even upload the applications on your mobile phone. One of the key thing is that you need to have a write-up on your technology certified by an IIT professor or a teacher. So that's the key. Someone has to say about how unique is your technology, how is it going to change or innovate from what is already existing there. So, while we start with who is a startup, I think, I've seen a lot of questions on compliance, but Can
you repeat that last, the letter that you said? Sorry to interrupt you.
What I meant is the application is actually, it's a very simple process. You can either do it on your mobile phone or on the website to be registered as a startup. But one key point which I wanted to highlight is, when we make this application, there is a letter of recommendation that you'll have to submit from an IIT professor who's going to talk about your technology product, what innovative it is, how is it different from existing product. This is one of the requirements that the Startup Council considers.
Thank you.
I'm not getting into too much details. You would have read all of this in the paper. Just for the current year, I saw a few questions on what is the timelines for filing. Generally, the due date for filing tax returns is January 21 for the current year. If you're not subject to tax audit, that is when your turnover limits are less than 5 crores, then in that case, when you're not subject to tax audit, you'll have to file your returns before December 20. In addition to it, there are quarterly returns, which generally every startup, every company will have to comply with. Generally, the returns have to be filed on June, September, December, and March. But timelines have been accordingly modified. you have time up till March 21 to file and comply with all the withholding tax returns. Now, again, very briefly, domestic compliances, like sir mentioned, there are multiple slab rates, which multiple rates which determine what rate of taxes have to be withheld on different payments. But what becomes very challenging is when you make payments outside of the country. Then the question is, how do you ascertain the taxability of such payments? What is important here is that, first you'll have to determine what is the character of such payments, and the rates will accordingly vary, whether you're paying salary outside, whether it is interest, royalty, technical services, capital gains. What is the nature of services that, what is the nature of payment that you're making, and the rates will apply. Another interesting point is India has entered into double taxation avoidance agreement with a number of countries. And the treaty has such overriding powers under the domestic law. The tax treaty rates will apply to the what is there under your domestic laws. No, so each of these countries, each of these section buckets of income have a different tax rate. I only want to leave a thought with you here, saying that whenever you're doing an overseas payment, please also look at the tax treaty to see what is the right amount of taxes. Rest of the compliances, as you would do to a domestic payment, will continue to be the same. For example, remittance of taxes, issuing of TDS credits, certificates, all of it will comply. But the only point in overseas compliance is to be sure that whether the particular income is taxable, and to take a particular tax treaty which has a rate for that particular income. So on structures, I'll just spend a little time here. We work at CFO Bridge. There are a number of promoters who reach out to us with different structuring needs. I've just conceptualized some thoughts where we see how people try to structure their business. The first column is the simplest, where you have a set of promoters who are trying to establish an Indian company. That company carries on business here. The promoters are here. The business is here. Suppose you have an overseas market. Someone feels US has a jurisdiction, or UK or Singapore has a jurisdiction where they see opportunities, and the promoters are based here. In that case, what we do is that, you ask the promoters to set up an Indian company, carry on operations there in that Indian entity. And also, if the activity requires some level of on-site support and support and presence, the Indian company will set up a wholly owned subsidiary in US. Okay, so wholly owned subsidiary will be will carry out on-site activities, do marketing activities in that particular geography. There can also be reverse scenario. You can have overseas promoters who are trying to do business in India. So in that case, there are two things that potentially is possible. You let the overseas investors, typically, NRIs who are outside in Dubai, UAE, US, UK, the Indian market. So they can set up an overseas entity, say typically a US company, and the US company can set up an Indian subsidiary and carry out business in India. So each of these investment structures literally depend on the kind of promoters you have. Where do you want to raise money? What are the markets you want to service? So the structures typically go where the promoters are and what kind of need it is. But in substance, what I want to leave here is that there is possibility to structure an organization the way you want it. And, there are tax treaties which help in minimizing tax rates and free flow of investments. So, other question that, comes out is the kind of structure, the startup should be, whether it is an LLP or company. Sir just mentioned, that LLP has a lower compliance. I completely agree. In fact, historically, we have seen companies following, businesses being set up as a company. But in terms of efficiency of compliance and ease of operate, LLP is also gaining importance. But one key point that we'll have to remember is, I'll go through the tax rates in the next few slides, While company, there are different tax rates. For example, newly set up company can come with 22% tax rates. If it is a newly set up manufacturing startup, they come with a tax rate of 15%. But LLPs come with a tax rate of 30% plus surcharge and cess. So that's a key point. LLP, the advantage is there are lower compliance. It's easier to operate. It's flexible to operate. Company has these compliances associated with it. There are a number of rigors that go with it, but the tax rates are lower. That's the point that we'll have to keep in mind. But both company and LLP are easily adopted, accepted structures. We have seen investors also choosing both the structures to meet their requirements. LLP, although is a new structure, is gained phenomenal importance and acceptance among the investor class. So then, next question, before I jump into tax, I just thought I'll give a concept overview on how most of these startups, operate. Capital structure, in terms of capital structure, the startups have enormous flexibility, and the latest introduction is the convertible notes. Generally, if there is a foreign capital that comes into your business or company, there is a requirement that the capital has to be fully converted. For example, a convertible debt or a convertible preference share, when it comes into the entity, it has to be converted into an equity. There cannot be a non-convertible instrument that is permitted into a company. But for startups, there are significant relaxation. Government today provides that a startup can raise convertible notes from a foreign source, and you call it convertible notes, but that can be redeemed at any point during the period. Within a 5-year period, it can be redeemed. There's only one requirement, that minimum value should be about 25 lakhs. And again, RBI exempts startups from valuation. So exchange control FEMA regulation prescribes basis in which entity has to be valued, how an investor can enter and exit. These kind of restrictions are not available for convertible notes which are being invested into startups. So very quickly jumping on to our tax tax regime. There's a new regime called 115BAA, where the effective tax rate is about 25%. And for manufacturing companies which have set up on or after 2019, the effective tax rate is about 17%. The difference being that the effective tax rate of 25%, which is 22% plus surcharge and cess, applies to all companies irrespective of their turnover. But 115BAB, the 15% tax rate, applies to only companies who are involved in the manufacturing sector. So this is the only difference. So for both the companies, the key point to remember is there is no, so like sir mentioned, there's something called as minimum alternate tax. Both these companies, there are no minimum alternate. Both these forms of regime, there are no minimum alternate tax. But there are also not incentives. There are certain incentives and deductions that are given in computing the total income. Some of these incentives and deductions are not available to both these forms of tax regime. So while computing your taxable income, you'll have to be extremely cautious to determine which tax rate you want to take. You have a tax rate of 30% for companies, 25% for companies, 17% for companies. You'll have to be mindful of which of these tax rates that you take, because once you make an election to one of it, then you cannot reverse back. And the implications are very varied. For example, if you choose a 25% tax rate in your return this year, it means you are foregoing some of the deductions that you have claimed in the past. So in the going forward, you can never move back to 30%. You can never claim certain deductions in the future. Similarly, 115BAB, the 17% tax rate, there's no MAT applicable, but there are no benefits, certain benefits that generally manufacturing companies have, that are also not available to the 17% tax bracket company. So therefore, the choice between 30 and 25 and 17 has to be carefully exercised. In addition to this, if there are profits in the entity, those profits will also suffer a dividend withholding in the hands of the shareholders. So whenever a company declares dividend, the shareholders get their dividend and it's taxed in their hands at their respective rates. So on companies, while we make a choice, we'll have to be very mindful of what are the pros and cons of each of this. How does our tax computation and rate impact? So it is not necessary that these rates have to be taken at year one itself. You can even do it later. We have seen many companies, opting to be under the historical tax regime of 30% and then slowly migrating to favorable tax regime, unfavorable tax regime. So this is a very basic comparison of tax rates, like I said, 22, 15, or, 25 or 30%. So an LLP, for example, will fall under the 30% tax rate. So once, we have seen the tax rate for startup companies. Now, the question that arises is, are there any incentives that are given by the government? Like I said, once it is approved by DIPP or DIPT, the startup is approved by the government, then it can avail 100% tax holiday for 3 consecutive years out of 10 years. So this is only for eligible startup companies. When I say 3 consecutive 10 years, from the point you start making profits, from that year onwards, 3 years you don't pay any tax on it. There's some conditions that are attached. The condition, one of the condition is that it is incorporated after 2016 but before 2021. But I would believe that these dates will get extended. The other condition is that the turnover does not exceed 100 crore in any financial year in which the deduction is claimed. So if you want to claim this deduction, it is important that your turnover for that particular year does not exceed 100 crores. The rest of the conditions are, I would say more theoretical, which says it should not be found by splitting up or reconstruction of a business already in existence. So which means that if you're already today, assuming you have set up a startup in 2014, you're running a business, but to claim this incentive, you set up one more entity and try and migrate your business. They're saying that those kind of, planning that we do, by forming a new entity and migrating business there, those will not be permitted to be eligible for 80IAC benefit. Again, it should not be found by using by used plant and machinery. So which means that for a startup to claim benefit under this, it has to be a new business, not formed by splitting up reconstruction, and not formed by plant and machinery which is already put to use for any other purpose. So this is the a tax exemption that you get under 80IAC. And coming to the most talked aspect of angel tax, I'll give you just a concept on what it means. Then we can maybe go into what this exemption is given. When you raise capital, share capital from an investor, there are 2 components that come into it. One is the equity and other is the share premium, assuming there is a share premium. Now, if it is a foreign investor, there are no conditions, there are no restrictions, because the investments are governed under the Foreign Exchange Management Act. And the company is fair to recognize the capital and premium. But if it is a domestic investment, what the law says is that if you are issuing shares beyond the fair value, then the difference between the fair value and the amount you receive is taxable in the hands of the company. So which is largely the share premium. So I'll give you an example. For example, if the value of the company is 25 rupees per share, but you raise 35 rupees per share, then the difference between 35 and 25 is considered to be an income in the hands of the company. So this is basically called as an angel tax, where the government sought to tax companies which were raising money beyond the fair value of shares. whatever be the intention and the objective behind doing this. What the law seek to tax was basically when you raise domestic capital beyond the fair value of the share, that is subject to tax in the hands of the company. This was widely debated, number of petitions made by number of startup association. And finally, in 2019, the government exempted startups from the said condition. There were some conditions that were attached to it. Like I said, the first thing is it has to be DPIIT recognized. It has to be recognized as a startup. Second, it says the amount of share capital and premium at the time of issue should not exceed 25 crores. So if you're exceeding 25 crores, even though you raise the money from domestic investor, then you will be subject to this angel tax, which means if you're raising beyond the fair value of share, if you're raising any capital, then you will be subject to tax in the hands of the company. So, these are provisions that are benefits that are available to the company. One is the tax exemption under 80-IAC. Second is the exemption from angel tax. These are the two critical taxes that apply to startups. Second is more as a method to boost investments in startups. Basically, exemption to individuals and HUF for investing in eligible startups. So exemption from tax on long-term capital gains on if you sell any residential property on or before March 21, such gains can be invested into eligible startups. Then in that case, the gains will be exempted from tax. Similarly, if there are long-term capital gains under 54E, investments can be made into eligible startups subject to a maximum amount of 50 lakhs. So if the investments are made into these eligible startups, then the capital gains will not be, the capital gains of the investor will not be liable to tax. There are, again, every investment, every income, every exemption comes with certain, caveats and caution points. Like it has to be a registered startup. The startup should use the amount only for purchase of asset and not transfer assets, and it should not transfer asset within 5 years from the date of purchase. So these are conditions that are attached to boost investments in the startup from an individual and investor standpoint. Last, I'll just touch upon this is the ESOP on employees. ESOPs are taxed as perquisites in the hands of employees at the time of exercise. So, for example, if a company issues ESOPs to its employees, and when the employee exercises it, the value of that exercise at that point of time is taxed as salary in his hands. And we all know for startups, the best way to compensate people, employees, are by issuing ESOPs. That's the only way people stay motivated and work with the business. But it had huge tax implication, which was a cause of concern. So there has been some liberalization on this in this last budget. What it says is that for a startup where an employee of a startup exercises its share, it is not taxed to him at that point of time, but there is a time limit. For example, up to 5 years from the date of exercise, it is not taxed. Or if he sells the security earlier or at the time of termination of employment, whichever is the earliest will be taxed. So if he doesn't sell the security or he continues to be in employment, it is taxed only after 5 years. But if he sells the security or terminates the employment, whichever occurs earlier, he will be liable to perquisite tax at the time of exercise. So once you exercise the perquisite, then it becomes salary. Therefore, the employer, which is the company, startup company, is under an obligation to withhold tax on that perquisite amount at the time of exercise of the stock options. The last point, which again affects many startups is there is a section called 79, which says that if there is a change in the shareholding beyond 51%, that is, if there is more than 51% of the shareholders change in the company, then the losses that are carry forward will not be entitled to be carry forward, and the company will lose its losses. Why this is important? It's very important because a startup, at least during the initial years, would have accumulated these losses, and these losses can ideally be used to set off in the future years when the company makes profit. The losses are allowed to be carried forward for at least 15 years. But what happens is, because there is a change in shareholding, when there is a new investor coming, or when the investor exits from one entity to another entity, these losses get disentitled because there is more than 51% shareholding change. The law has been amended for startups, where they're saying is that up to a period of 7 years from the date of incorporation, okay, any restriction that any change in shareholding beyond 51% that takes place will not be applicable for startups. So up to a period of 7 years from the point to incorporate, any change in the shareholding for 51% will not affect your loss position, and you can carry it forward. I mean, this may not be, I just thought I'll just put in a point. This is on fast track insolvency. Insolvency resolution generally takes a lot of time, but startups, there are provisions where under the IBC, the startups can be resolved with insolvency can be resolved within 45 days. And if there's a new investor who wants to take or to restructure the existing startup, that can be done at the maximum speed, at the speed of 45 days. So these are very, quick points that I wanted to share. I leave it to Ajay sir to take it over from here.
Hello, Ajay sir, are you there? You are on mute actually.
Okay, yeah. So, Sudharji, thank you for such a wonderful presentation. You covered up everything in simple terms, the best way it can be presented. And I think the startup ecosystem, the participants might have benefited, or then they might have be having lots of questions now because they have understood so many basic aspects. So there are requests whether your presentation can be shared. If possible, we'll share it with them.
Sure, absolutely, sir.
We'll share it with them, and we'll take the questions one by one, important ones which you have not answered, or which Mr. Govind can also, Vivek can also answer. Before that, let us go to the most important, one of the important, as discussed items today, that is the GST. As Mr. Vivek was mentioning, it itself is a startup. So there are lots of problems on both sides. Let us understand from Ramakrishnan various aspects, especially for the startups. What are the benefits they have from this? Over to Ramakrishnan, please.
Good evening, all. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
So, respected dignitaries, Vivek sir, Sudhakar sir, Ajay sir, Kerala Startup Mission Puzzle. First of all, thank you for this opportunity, for giving me this opportunity to address a lot of entrepreneurs. So let us quickly get into the topic. I'll just start sharing my screen, and I'll just share my screen now. Yeah, I hope my screen is also visible.
Yeah.
So in this short presentation, I've tried to put across some key matters which are relevant for a startup. Although, as Vivek sir and others have mentioned, it's quite a wide area. And what I feel is relevant and what I have incorporated based on many of the queries received, let us go through that. So a quick touch upon the basics. What is GST, first of all? It's a tax on supplies. We use the word supplies because GST covers both goods as well as services. So it's not a tax on sale, it is not a tax on service, it's a tax on supplies. And supplies include both goods and services. So whether you are a service provider, whether you are a manufacturer, whether you are a trader, GST can be applicable. Key point to note, GST is a consumption-based tax. When we say consumption-based, it simply means that GST is not a cost to the supplier. It is not a cost to the business entity. It is not a cost to your LLP or to your company or to a partnership firm. It is something which the businessman or the entrepreneur recovers from his consumer. So therefore, GST is not paid out of the pocket of the businessman. It is paid out of the pocket of the consumer. Let us be clear on this. So therefore, we should not have this notion that GST is something which hits the businessman. It does hit in some ways. It creates working capital problems at times, which I will detail upon in a while. But 100%, whatever you sell, whatever services you supply, GST is the tax which you collect from your consumer. So that's why it's called a consumption-based tax. It ultimately hits the consumer. If you look at the supply chain, at every stage it is just passed on from one level to another. Finally, the entire burden rests on the consumer alone. That is how the tax is designed. So what is the responsibility of a business entity? What is the responsibility of the company which sells goods or supplies services? The responsibility is limited to collecting tax from the consumer and paying it to the government. So that is the responsibility of the business entity. It is to collect and pay. Now, why is GST at times a working capital problem? The thing is, when you collect it from the consumer and pay, ideally it should not be a working capital problem. But the problem comes because the business entity is supposed to pay the tax irrespective of whether the consumer has paid or not. So I have sold some goods to a consumer, he has not paid me, but I have billed him. In this situation, when I have raised a bill, I have raised an invoice, I am still bound to pay that tax to the government. That is what creates a working capital problem. Otherwise, it is something which is entirely recoverable from the consumer. It doesn't hit the profits of the business entity. So this is where I need to. So if at all we start collecting tax, we make collections. One mistake which commonly businesses make is we collect tax from the consumer and we use it for some other purpose. And that's where we end up in a situation where we are unable to make the remittance to the government. If you have not got the payment from your consumer, that's a different issue. That genuinely does create working capital problems. So sum and substance of these points is simply that GST is something to be collected from the consumer. Second point, GST is destination based. The tax goes to that state where the goods are delivered, to which the services are supplied. In other words, if sitting in Kerala, I render a service to another person in Tamil Nadu, my tax, which I collect from the person in Tamil Nadu, it goes to Tamil Nadu. So it's destination based. So in this context, we need to understand that when we take GST registration and we have multiple locations across different states, we need to take a registration for each state. It is not one single registration for the country. Unlike income tax, you can have one single PAN card and operate throughout the country. GST requires that you take registration in each state, and this is something to do with our federal structure, because each state needs its revenue. So therefore, we have two components of GST, the CGST, the central GST, and the state GST. So I have defined it. For an intra-state transaction, if you sell goods from Kerala into Kerala, you collect CGST plus SGST. For example, the tax rate of a product might be 18%. If you are selling it from Kerala to Kerala, you collect 9% CGST and 9% SGST. And the SGST portion of it, the state GST portion of it goes to Kerala. The same product, suppose you are selling it from Kerala to Tamil Nadu, you will be levying a tax called integrated GST. You will charge IGST on your customer at Tamil Nadu, and 50% of the IGST will go to the Tamil Nadu government. It goes to the revenue of Tamil Nadu. So therefore, we need to make a distinction. We need to identify where is the supplier and where is the recipient. This is a very fundamental thing in GST, because you are not supposed to charge a tax wrongly. So where it's an interstate transaction, you need to charge IGST. Where it is an intra-state transaction, you need to charge CGST plus SGST. Now the last point there, export, import, I will come to it a little last. An export. Now in GST, supplying to a special economic zone and supplying by way of export stand at par. Both are treated for the purpose of GST. Now there are exemptions available when you export. You need not pay tax on it. There is tax relief. One purpose, you cannot charge Indian tax from a foreign party, point one. Second, taxes are exempted because of the intention of the government to promote exports also. So when you supply goods from India to an SEZ in India, or you supply goods from India to a foreign party, you are exporting goods. When you comply with certain conditions, comply with certain procedural formalities and documentation, that export will be tax-free. If you do not comply with those certain conditions, you have to pay IGST, integrated GST. So basically exports are zero rated, they are tax-free, provided you comply with certain conditions. I will come to those conditions in the subsequent slide. Another aspect of it, when you import goods, you need to pay IGST again. So import of goods and import of services as well. So goods are brought, they are cleared by the customs, and when you clear it from the customs, you pay customs duty, and in addition, you pay IGST. So IGST comes into play when you import goods, when you export goods without complying with certain conditions, or when you sell from one state to another. You supply goods or services from one state to another. The tax to be charged is IGST, and when the transaction is within the state, the transaction is CGST plus the tax you have to levy is CGST plus SGST. Now, it is of utmost importance that when we raise an invoice and give it to our client, we have to identify whether it involves two states or whether it involves a single state. It may sound easy for goods. When you sell goods from one state into one state or one state to another state, it appears to be quite easy. But in the case of services, there can be multiple kinds of complications. So if you are billing for a service, we need to be very clear on whether it is a CGST plus SGST transaction or whether it is an IGST transaction. There is something called the place of supply rules. So these have to be complied with in the case of, especially in the case of services. For goods, it's comparatively easier. We move on to the next slide. Now the concept of input and output. Take the case of a trader or take the case of a supplier of service. Whatever goods he sells or whatever services he supplies, he charges his customer or his consumer, he raises an invoice on his consumer, and he collects tax from the consumer. So whatever he supplies, the value of what he supplies is called his outward supply. And the tax which he collects on his supply is called output tax. So output tax is a liability. So I am a supplier of goods. I give goods, I give an invoice, I collect tax through my invoice. When I collect tax through my invoice, I collect the value of the goods plus tax. So I am collecting the tax on behalf of the government to be paid to the government, which is a liability for me. So my outward supplies, I collect output tax, which is a liability I have to pay to the government. Now, to sell goods, I buy goods. To sell services, I may buy goods, I may buy some services. To supply goods, I may use some services. So these are all what I call my purchases, what I call my other expenses, which I charge to the profit and loss account. So I make use of many goods and services to effect my supply. These are called inward supplies. And when I buy goods, when I procure services, the services which I procure can be anything like manpower services. It could be telephone charges, it could be couriers, it could be so many other things, so many contracts. So I pay tax to my supplier on all these. This is my input tax. So my supplier has collected tax from me. I get credit for that. So that's my asset. So I have collected tax from my customers. I have paid tax to my suppliers. So every month what I need to do is I have to balance these out against one another. Let us say I have collected 10,000 rupees of tax from my customers. I have paid 7,000 rupees of tax to my suppliers. I can set these off against each other and I will remit 3,000 rupees to the government, which means the government has entirely earned revenue of 10,000 rupees on the entire transaction. So this is the mechanism of output and input. I've spoken probably a little fast to cover the points within a given time. So every month the supplier has to pay the net difference between input and output to the government. So this is basically the mechanism of GST. You collect tax on your output, you pay tax to your supplier on your inward supplies. These two are set off against each other and net remittance is made to the government. Now, a point of caution. I just talked to you about what you are supplying and what you are availing, what services and what goods you are availing to effect your outward supply. This is what I touched upon. Now, when you start a business or even if you have got an ongoing business, there are these certain points which I have mentioned in the slide, which you need to contemplate upon, analyze, understand properly, so that you don't go wrong on the tax which you collect or the tax which you pay. Now, we need to identify what is our activity. First of all, is it a taxable activity? Does my activity attract tax? If it does attract tax, is it a goods? Is it services? What is the rate of tax? Can my product be classified under two different heads? The same product may look different for in two different classifications. So there is a very elaborate system of classification called the HSN coding system. So it's often very confusing. Even for a simple product, we might end up paying a different rate of tax if we wrongly classify it. So we need to identify the correct description of our goods and accordingly identify the tax rate. More so in the case of services, because services are a little more complex than goods. We need to document how we are rendering the service. For example, if we are executing a construction activity, we need to document properly. Are we supplying the labor? Are we supplying the material? Or is my client buying the material by himself? Am I simply executing the labor? Is the material purchased in my name as a supplier, or is the material purchased in the name of my customer? These are things which we need to contemplate upon and clearly identify the entire trail of transactions. From where to where are the goods moving? Who is my supplier? What am I buying? Where is it going? All these logistics has to be correctly planned and documented. So you need often to take expert advice also on structuring your transaction, because that could make all the difference when you pay GST. The liability could be very significantly affected by the way you, simply by the way you structure your transaction. Planning is possible in this also, not evasion. Planning is possible when you structure your transaction properly. So particularly in the case of services, you need to identify the entire trail of transactions. Again, I have mentioned there, you need to identify the location and places involved, because you have to charge the correct tax, either IGST or CGST plus SGST. So the entire process should be well documented, well understood and transparent. So this is one thing which particularly new business entities should be abundantly cautious about when they venture into a business. Identify the product, identify the service, identify the tax rate. I am at the cost of a repetition. I am just bringing it to your attention. Okay. Now the very key question. Should I take registration? Should I not take registration? Do I have any benefit in taking registration? Now, to sum it up, there have been many questions from the participants as to whether startups have any particular GST benefits. Answer, unfortunately, is startups are subject to more or less the same system of tax as any other business entity. Very little of tax incentive in terms of GST to startups. More so because it is not a cost, as I pointed out, it is not a cost for the startup. It is something which the startup has to collect from the consumer because it's consumption based. But then there are these registration formalities which we need to know. When does a startup have to take registration and so on? That is what I have highlighted in the coming slide. So basically there is a threshold limit of 20 lakh rupees. So when your turnover, when your gross sales, when your revenue touches this 20 lakh threshold, you need to take registration. Now there has been an enhancement of limit of 20 lakhs to 40 lakhs in respect of goods alone. Some of the states have notified it, Kerala has notified it. So in Kerala, if you are a dealer in goods, you have a threshold limit of 40 lakhs. If you are rendering services, your threshold limit is 20 lakhs. So many startups involved in IT, their applicable threshold would be 20 lakhs. Now, how do I calculate my turnover? 20 lakhs. To calculate your turnover, you need to take into consideration all your revenues, whether it's a taxable supply or a non-taxable supply. So all your revenues need to be added together. Not only that, all your revenues across all the states. I had mentioned earlier that you need to take registration in every state. Please note the threshold limit of 20 lakhs is not per state. It is for the turnover of all the states put together. So in Kerala, you have 5 lakhs turnover. Tamil Nadu, you have 15 lakhs turnover. You are liable for taking GST registration. So the turnover in all the states across the country has to be taken into account. Also, even your non-taxable turnover has to be added. So you may be dealing in taxable products and non-taxable products. To determine whether you have to take a registration, you add your taxable plus non-taxable turnover. There is a misconception that only your taxable turnover counts for registration. No, you need to add your taxable turnover plus your non-taxable turnover to identify whether you are liable to take registration. Now, there are some cases where you need to take registration even if your turnover has not touched 20 lakhs. That is called compulsory registration. Compulsory registration is to be done if you are a supplier of goods and you are supplying goods interstate. If you are dealing goods only within Kerala, you can avoid taking registration till your turnover touches 40 lakhs. But if you supply or sell goods from Kerala to Tamil Nadu, even 1 rupee of goods you sell from Kerala to Tamil Nadu, you are supposed to take registration. Even if your turnover is 1 rupee. So if you are to make interstate supply of goods, registration is compulsory irrespective of your turnover. Take the case of services. Services does not have this problem. If you supply interstate supply of services, if you are doing interstate supply of services, you need to take registration only if your turnover touches 20 lakhs.
Ramesh,
Which is given for service provider.
sorry, Ramesh, can you use there are some requests to use the power presentation slideshow mode.
Sorry?
So that slideshow mode for your presentation so that it can be slightly bigger.
Okay. I'm audible, right?
Yeah, you are audible. Yeah.
Okay. Now I hope the slide is better visible. Yeah.
Thank you.
So these points I have touched upon here. I can go on now. Should I speed up? Because I have time, I have no problem. Yeah. So registration is compulsory when your turnover touches 20 lakhs, 40 lakhs in the case of goods, but you have to compulsorily take registration when you are doing an interstate supply of goods, even if your turnover has not touched the threshold limit. Last point there is e-commerce operators who are liable to collect tax at source need to take registration. The last part of this presentation is regarding e-commerce. I will detail upon it later. Now, once I'm registered, what happens? Does the startup or does the business entity have any benefit? I won't say the business entity has any direct benefit, except that when you are compelled to file your tax returns monthly, your accounting system becomes a little more disciplined when you are GST registered. That is one indirect benefit which I say a startup will have if it takes registration. An indirect benefit. It's not a direct benefit, because the consequence of taking registration is that you have to collect tax from your customer and pay it to the government. So it's a compliance requirement which has to be done faithfully. But as such, the indirect benefit is you have to maintain your accounts in a professional way, give the necessary information in your tax returns, and that is what probably benefits the startup indirectly. So you are liable to collect and remit tax on your supplies. Now let us say you take a registration even before your turnover touches 20 lakhs. What happens? Can I wait till I reach 20 lakhs to collect GST? Answer is no. The moment you are registered, you have to start collecting taxes even though your turnover has not touched 20 lakhs. And whenever you quote prices and whenever you charge an invoice on your customer, it's on a price plus GST basis. You will be liable to remit the taxes monthly using the form 3B. Right now the form is 3B, and let us say take the month of November. You need to pay the taxes of November before the 20th of December. Some staggered dates are available, 20th, 22nd, 23rd, etc., which I'm not going into now. Basically, this month's tax has to be remitted within the 20th of next month through a form called 3B. Similarly, another form, which often on a quarterly basis, often on a monthly basis, has to be filed, showing the details of your sales or supply, which is called GSTR1. This monthly filing is required, failing which there are heavy penalties. Somebody had asked a query on fines and penalties. For every day of delay, you are charged 50 rupees tax, and it goes up to 10,000 rupees. And for delay, you are charged interest at the rate of 18%. So for delay in remitting beyond 20th, you are charged interest of 18% and 50 rupees fine for every day of delay. And that fine will go up to 10,000 rupees. So this is a consequence of not filing the return within time. Now I said, once you are GST registered, you have to collect tax from your customer. But for small service providers and small traders, there is an option given which is called composition. So if you are opting for this scheme called composition, you don't have to collect tax on every single invoice. You are allowed to pay 1% of your total sales turnover as tax to the government, but you are denied the benefit of inputs. So the tax which you have paid on your inward supplies, you do not get a credit for that. Whatever taxes whatever sales you have effected, pay 1% GST of that to your to the government, and there ends the matter. So that is available for traders or manufacturers up to 1.5 crores who have a turnover of up to 1.5 crores, and there is a 6% composition scheme for service providers. And for restaurants, the composition rate is 5%. So composition scheme means it is intended for small traders, small manufacturers, small service providers. They need not go through the hassle of collecting tax on every invoice. They can simply pay a fixed percentage of their revenue to the government. This is done on a quarterly basis. This scheme is called composition. I'm not discussing this. These are the documents which you need to submit for GST registration. Basically, you have to have a constitution deed, your identity documents, photographs, all those things. It is there for your reference. This is a more detailed explanation of those bullet points kept for your reference will be sent to you. Now coming to exports, which are most extremely relevant for startups. Exports are basically tax-free. I had mentioned this earlier, and this tax-free status is subject to conditions. Export is treated as a zero-rated supply. And it is also deemed to be an interstate supply, because of which export attracts IGST. Now this appears to be a contradiction. Export attracts IGST, but I also said export is tax-free. The thing is, export is tax-free when you comply with the given conditions. If you do not comply with the given conditions and export goods, you are liable to pay IGST. So now export may be export of goods, export of services. The key condition there is that two conditions are given in this slide. For services as well as goods, the payment for that has to be received in convertible foreign currency. This is intended to enrich the country's foreign exchange reserves. And that is why the exemption is given and this condition is laid out. Which means if you are exporting goods from India to USA, but somebody from India is paying you, that doesn't qualify as an export for this purpose, for exemption purpose. If you are exporting goods or services from India to a foreign country, money should come in convertible foreign exchange and your bank should provide you with a foreign inward remittance certificate. That is the complete documentation. So if the GST authorities require, you should be able to produce a foreign inward remittance certificate saying that I have received payment for my exports or for my services in convertible foreign exchange. The time limits are there. For goods, it should be realized within 1 year from the date of invoice, and for services it is 1 year from the date of invoice, and for goods within 9 months from the date of export. Failing which you have to pay IGST. You should not be paid locally for your exports. This is the condition based on which export becomes tax-free or it becomes a zero-rated. Now, documentation. Supplier is given two options. First option is, I'll come to it later. The second option is what is good for us as suppliers, filing a letter of undertaking. It is a very simple process. All you need to do is log into your GST account, GST login ID, and file it online. It's a very simple declaration saying that you agree to, you ensure that the amounts will be realized in foreign exchange. Digitally sign it or verify it. There ends the matter. Once a year you need to do it before you effect any exports. If in case you omit to do this, then you have the option of first paying IGST and then claiming it back as a refund. It is not an advisable option. It simply puts a strain upon your working capital. So ideally, once you GST register, whether you plan to export goods or not, you file a letter of undertaking. If at all there is an export, the interesting thing is it does not need to be done on a case-to-case basis. It is just a one-time affair every year. So you can file a letter of undertaking and enjoy the tax benefits of export. And not only that, whatever inputs you have used for effecting the export, you can apply for a refund. You have purchased goods paying GST. You have exported those goods tax-free. Whatever taxes you have paid while purchasing the goods, you can file a refund claim also. So this is the extent of encouragement which is given for exports. Now I mentioned earlier that the special economic zone enjoys the same status as a foreign territory. So whether you are supplying by way of export or whether you are supplying to a special economic zone, this is the same procedure to be followed. And the difference comes in some amount of documentation. When you are supplying goods to a special economic zone, what you need to do is you need to get a declaration from the person in the SEZ that he is using it for authorized operations. Ensure that the GST number which is quoted by the SEZ, you verify that number through the website and you will find that whether it is an SEZ status or not. That due diligence should be done. When somebody says, I am in an SEZ, verify their GST registration number. You will know whether it is tagged to a GST. Sorry, whether it is tagged to a special economic zone. Plus, you file a letter of undertaking. You also get saying that we will use it only for authorized operations. We will use those goods or services within the special economic zone. And with this declaration, you can supply goods to an SEZ tax-free. Now I will deal with what happens when an SEZ is rendering services or supplying goods to others. So one case, somebody outside the SEZ is giving supply to the SEZ. Second case, somebody within the SEZ is giving service or goods to a person outside SEZ. Supply is just like import, because I said SEZ is like a foreign territory. So when I am in the domestic tariff area, in the normal area, I am buying goods from SEZ. I have to pay customs duty, clear the goods just like customs, and pay IGST. So when a special economic zone supplies goods to somebody outside the SEZ to a domestic tariff area, he has to charge IGST. So it is not that everything within an SEZ is tax-free. If you supply goods to an SEZ, it is tax-free. If you give services to an SEZ, it is tax-free. But if an SEZ gives goods or services to a territory outside SEZ, it is IGST. Even though the SEZ is in Kerala and the buyer is also in Kerala, SEZ is deemed to be something like a foreign territory for this purpose. So whether it's goods or services, tax is leviable by the. So these two slides deal with a supply made by an SEZ to a domestic tariff area. Now, what do you? This is something which we have already discussed. When somebody in a domestic tariff area supplies to an SEZ, the same procedure from the SEZ has to be followed. The last part of the presentation deals with e-commerce. This is again something very relevant, I think, for most of us. So e-commerce operator. So an e-commerce operator needs to get registered. So who is an e-commerce operator? We have various e-commerce operators like Amazon, like Uber, like Swiggy. All those names are familiar to us. Now I will give the example of Amazon. I'll give the example of Uber for us to understand these provisions. In Amazon, three parties are involved. One is Amazon, who provides the platform. One is the supplier who supplies, the seller of goods who supplies goods to Amazon, and myself, the buyer. So I am buying goods through Amazon from a dealer named X. Now, Amazon is GST registered. The dealer X also has to be GST registered. Why? That is a case for compulsory registration. The dealer X is compulsory to be registered irrespective of his turnover, simply because he is operating through an e-commerce operator. This is a requirement in GST law. If I decide to sell my goods through an e-commerce operator, I have to register. The e-commerce operator is also registered. Now the buyer, let us say I am the buyer, I am buying goods from dealer X. I place an order. Dealer X charges GST from me. So I get an invoice from the dealer, price 100 rupees, GST 12 rupees, total 112. So I pay through my online banking, I pay 112 rupees. Now who collects this? Amazon collects this. Amazon pays this to the dealer. I don't pay it directly to the dealer. Dealer invoices me, dealer gives me the goods, I pay 112 rupees to Amazon. Right? Now Amazon is collecting payment from me on behalf of the dealer. Now Amazon is required to collect tax at source. So an e-commerce operator who is collecting money from the customer on behalf of the dealer has to deduct, or rather has to collect 1% tax from the dealer. So which means dealer is charging me 112 rupees, which is 100 rupees plus 12 rupees tax. I am paying 112 rupees to Amazon. Now what Amazon does is, Amazon is supposed to pay this entire 112 rupees to the dealer. Of course, they will collect their commission. I'm not going into that now. 112 rupees is paid by Amazon to the dealer, but Amazon has to deduct 1 rupee, 1% of 100, and pay it to the government on behalf of the dealer. Now Amazon will pay only 111 rupees to the dealer. Amazon has collected 1 rupee tax from the dealer. Now the dealer has to pay 12 rupees tax to the government. So the dealer pays 12 rupees minus 1 rupee which Amazon has already paid. This is the mechanism of tax collection at source. So Amazon has to have two kinds of registrations. One is a regular GST registration and one is a registration as a person who collects tax at source. So Amazon will have two kinds of GST registration. One as a service provider on the commission which he collects from the dealer. Two as a person who deducts or who collects tax at source. So Amazon collects money from me on behalf of the dealer. While making this remittance back to the dealer, Amazon has to collect 1 rupee tax, which is tax collection. So therefore, for this purpose, Amazon needs to compulsorily take a GST registration. Now I mentioned that a supplier of goods who supplies goods through an e-commerce portal has to take registration. But a supplier of service does not have this requirement. A supplier of service, if his turnover is below threshold limit, he does not have to take registration even if he is supplying through an e-commerce operator. So supplier of goods through e-commerce operator has to compulsorily take registration. Supplier of service does not have compulsory registration. Supplier of service needs to take registration only if his turnover crosses 20 lakhs. Supplier of goods through e-commerce has to compulsorily take registration. Now, this is the requirement of tax collection at source. Tax collection at source, I have just explained. When Amazon collects the money on behalf of the dealer from me, and Amazon makes the payment to the dealer, Amazon collects 1% TCS. Second point, e-commerce operators are not required to collect TCS from unregistered suppliers. The only unregistered suppliers which an e-commerce operator will be dealing with is the service providers in certain categories. Now I come to Uber. Uber is again an e-commerce operator who provides a platform for us to hire vehicles. Now, just like the supplier of goods who is a dealer, the supplier of service is the driver in Amazon. The driver or the person who owns the car. Now, that person who owns the car is not expected to take registration. But we still end up paying GST on our Uber rides. The reason is there is a special provision called Section 9(5), where certain categories of services are mentioned, where the service provider is unregistered. Because of the fact that the service provider is unregistered, the e-commerce operator collects tax. So when we book an Uber, the driver is giving us service, the driver is not registered. Unlike the Amazon dealer who is registered, the driver is not registered, and the driver doesn't have the obligation to take GST registration and collect tax. Uber collects the tax and pays it to the government, and Uber pays the driver independently. So in the case of these categories, so who all have to do it? Services by way of transportation of passengers by radio taxi, cab, cycle. Services by way of accommodation in hotels. For example, Oyo rooms. You have small hotels or lodges who are not GST registered, and they are providing services through this portal. The portal has to collect tax. They are not obligated to collect tax. Again, services by way of housekeeping, plumbing, carpentry, etc. So we have these portals where we get these kind of professionals who give us various kinds of services. So the obligation is on them. So this is the manner in which e-commerce operators are structured. So e-commerce operator who collects tax, who is liable to collect taxes, so has to take a registration. So for all practical purposes, e-commerce operator needs to take a registration, and he has to comply with this tax collection at source mechanism. And in some cases, he needs to collect taxes under section 9(5), where the supplier of services is unregistered. So I think time is up.
Thank you, Ramesh, and thank you. You have given a detailed presentation of the GST aspects. Hope you will be sharing your presentation with the public.
Yes, I will.
Share it with the presentation. And see, we have all crossed the time of 4 o'clock. Fasil, can we take a couple of questions, because most of the questions have been answered? Can we take a couple of questions? In that case, they can.
You can take questions definitely.
Yeah, please, Ramesh, can you?
Yes.
Remove the screen. Yeah, you can remove the screen. Yeah, from the presentation, please. Okay, yeah. Those who want to ask questions, you can kindly unmute and ask a question, because Mr. Bibe had to leave because he had to attend a board meeting. He had to leave. Mr. Sudhakar and Ramesh, both of them are here. They have answered most of your queries and, through their presentations, video presentation they have made. All the three will be available to you either through email or through phone. We will be sharing that also with you. One thing is very clear now, that the startup, you should have a good taxation kind of person in your office, or somebody who can help you on this. So if you have any important questions to ask which is not answered or addressed, you can unmute and ask. Before asking the question, please identify yourself and also tell to whom you want to ask the question. Okay, please. We can take a couple of questions.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, myself Shahid here. I am from software industry. Okay, actually export. I am doing software export. Okay, I am facing an issue while receiving the payments from abroad, because sometimes I am receiving directly the payment to our bank account, like RTGS or something, because they are making the payment via some payment gateways, TransferWise, PayPal, like that. That's why we are receiving the payment directly into your account. But some of our clients making the payments via wire transfer. That's why we are receiving the emails, and we need to confirm the payment, then only we'll get the credit. But some clients from abroad only, we have the invoice, we have the agreement, everything is there, but their payments we are receiving directly to our account, like our RTGS payment. Is there any problem for that?
The problem in the sense, Ramesh, are you clear? And
I fully couldn't catch your question. You are receiving payments from abroad.
Abroad. But in the statement, it's showing like a RTGS payment.
Okay.
It's automatically converting the payment while it's coming. Okay.
Okay. So that is payment in convertible foreign currency. Ask your bank if they can give you a foreign inward remittance certificate.
Okay.
Then it will be export. You are asking whether it is eligible to qualify as an export. Is that your query?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, it is. It qualifies as an export provided your service recipient is outside India, your goods or services are consumed outside India, and you receive the payment in convertible foreign currency.
Okay.
You are eligible provided you file a letter of undertaking also.
Okay, fine. That means, I mean, I can receive the payment through some payment gateways also, right? I mean, TransferWise, PayPal.
But
that's also
what you
no
need to
right?
check with your bank is whether they are in a position to give you a FIRC, foreign inward remittance certificate.
Okay.
That's what is the necessary documentation to prove that it is received in convertible foreign exchange.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, I've seen a couple of questions from Nairo Research India. Who is that? May I know who is available? Hello.
Hi, sir. Myself, Giri this side.
Can you put the question instead of my reading?
Yes, we are in a different situation. So we are importing scientific softwares of course, we are both product and services. So we are importing scientific software as a non-physical import. So it will be electronic download considered as services, and we pay 18% RCM.
Yes.
Now,
I saw that way.
yes, as per November 2017 notification to education and research, goods can be supplied at 5% concessional rate based on declaration. Now, when we do that, so we are converting services to goods because we are given permission to burn it on a DVD and supply it locally, and we are doing that. Now, because of this 13% difference, which is always lying back in GST, we went for refund application. When we went for refund application, they said import as service, selling as goods, there is no provision for refund. And recently we saw the two orders from Gujarat High Court and Maharashtra that they have given an order that this has to go for a refund. But when we applied in Kerala, they said that is applicable to that state, not applicable to Kerala.
They are right in their own way, because the GST law does not permit refund in respect of input services. Unfortunately, there is no logic behind it. Concerned parties, concerned associations should give a representation to the government and get this law amended. Till then, if Gujarat High Court says something, Kerala High Court won't listen. Kerala High Court gives an opposite view, that will be applicable in Kerala. So till then, that will be the situation.
So the question here is, there is an applicability that, there is an applicability that within 2 years we have to claim for refund. Now, if this law is not coming and we don't go for refund, whether this will be safe there or I have to disclose my company to get this money back.
That's a very contentious issue. This again, if some such situation comes, you will need to go to appeal to the higher authorities and come to a conclusion. Okay. It's very difficult to give when courts themselves are
I understand.
Boring, it is difficult for me to give.
Because almost 21 lakhs is lying there.
The thing is, there needs to be a law, amendment in law, which probably maybe software associations, research associations have to make representations to the government and get it amended with retrospective effect, with the relaxations in the time limit. That is the best course.
Okay, Vinod Joni is there. Vinod Joni, Vinod is there. Hello, Mr. Sudhagar, there was a query from Vinod Joni. Could you please touch upon the Sweat Equity 2? What is the Sudhagar?
Yes, I'm here, sir. So Sweat Equity are basically issued to promoters, basically for putting in their sweat and blood to the organization. Sweat Equity, like stock options, like I mentioned, stock options, Sweat Equity can also be issued to founder members who have contributed significant technology, value, innovation to the business.
So would there be a need for valuing the stock before Sweat Equity is issued?
Yes, so every issue that you do from a company, whether it is Sweat Equity or stock options, will always be subject to valuation guidelines.
Thank you.
Hello. Any more questions? Mr. Najib is there? Najib? Mr. Najib? Okay, any more questions? Okay, Fasil.
Yeah.
I think we are through with the questions, and they have shared their email ID and all phone numbers also. They can also be in touch with them. They want any clarifications. We can share the recording as well as a presentation to the registered participants.
Yes, we'll be sending the YouTube link. The session will be uploaded to YouTube, and we'll be sharing the link And also I have collected the presentation from Ramakrishnan. I'll be collecting from Sudhakarji as well. And we'll send you as an email to all participants to the registered email ID. That we can do.
In that case, can we conclude, Fasil, if there are no specific queries?
I think we have no further questions, so we can conclude. Dear participants, dear entrepreneurs, thank you very much for joining the session and actively participating, interacting with the speakers. And I personally really loved the session because we had a lot of participants, and with the very short time, the speakers were amazingly, they delivered their content. You know, everyone know this is not a content where we could completely cover in 90 minutes, which is not possible. And this lot of doubts also there. But everyone, Vivek already shared, Vivek already very simply, he said in a very 10 to 15 minutes, he covered everything regarding the tax in a very short span of time. And unfortunately, he couldn't stay full time because he had another meeting. He was mentioned in the beginning itself. And Sudhakarji mentioned everything about company, LLP, what are the taxes applicable, how to manage that, everything. And the final session was by Ramakrishnan was amazingly informative. You know, he covered everything about GST and what is GST, what are the exemptions available, and everything. Hope all the participants got a very good understanding about the session. And last but not least, I would like to thank bottom of my heart for taking all the effort to coordinate and throughout the session to our Ajay sir, because he's like part of our community, part of our family. He's there like almost every day. You know, today we had another 2 meetings before this. You know, so I'm very thankful to him as well. Thank you, Ajay sir.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity. Ramesh, somebody has asked for you to share your phone number if possible. You can put it in chat box.
Ramesh, you are on mute. Please
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I have put it in my presentation. I'll share it here also.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Sudhakarji and Ramakrishnan and all participants for being here and making it a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhakarji.
Thank you.